Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today, we will hear the presentation Form-Based Codes, a Path Towards More Equitable Communities. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the questions box located in your GoToWebinar tool panel. And for your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in the questions box in the GoToWebinar tool panel, and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. On your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2022. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today we're sponsored by the Planning in the Black Community Division, so thanks to you all for joining us this year and for hosting today's session. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our next 3 upcoming sessions. You can register for these and all of our upcoming sessions by heading over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 credits for live viewing. You can record those AICPCM credits by heading over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or event number. Both of those can be found on our website, again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Make sure you, if you're on social media, to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes. I will post when new sessions are available for you to register for, and then I also send out a weekly reminder of what session we have coming up on Friday. And we record all of our sessions and we post them onto our YouTube channel. So head over to YouTube and be sure to subscribe to us so that you get notified when a new session is up and available. If you head over there, you will see that we have well over 400 session recordings that are available for view for free. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to today's presenter. Again, if you have any questions for our panelists or you have tech questions, just put those in the questions box located in your GoToWebinar tool panel. All right, let me get things moved over.
All right.
You're good to go.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Well, it's afternoon on my end. I'm not sure about in Ohio. I'm in DC. We have a quick little poll that I would ask for you all to take. I want to kind of hear just really quickly before we get started, what comes to mind when you hear the phrase form-based code? Christine is going to help me by dropping that in the chat. And you can just go ahead and start responding to that as you get it. And then once we start getting some responses coming in, it'll generate a word cloud and we'll kind of talk through it really high level. So while that's running, I'm going to go ahead and get started with my presentation. Christine gave us a nice introduction. This form-based code, a path towards more equitable communities. My name is Tokar Nicole Thomas. I am the Director of Land Use and Development with Smart Growth America. Smart Growth America is a national nonprofit, and our North Stars, we envision a country where no matter where you live or who you are, you can enjoy living in a place that is healthy, prosperous, and resilient. We empower communities through technical assistance, advocacy, and thought leadership to realize our vision of livable places, healthy people, and shared prosperity. Our 3 programmatic priorities are climate change and resilience, advancing racial equity, healthy communities, and we achieve all 3 of those through our impact model that we just talked through. I come to Smart Growth America, I just landed in June, so I'm relatively new, and my spheres of influence as the Director of Land Use and Development are split mainly into 2. The first one is serving as the Executive Director of the Form-Based Codes Institute, and then the second part mainly surrounds zoning innovation through technical assistance, policy advocacy, and thought leadership. I bring practical planning experience in comprehensive planning, zoning administration, community development, and community redevelopment to the role. And my personal professional passion is housing attainability. I kind of got bit by the housing bug in graduate school. I was a HUD scholar, and I focused on affordable housing in Florida. And that passion has just stayed with me throughout my entire life. So coming to Smart Growth America was a perfect alignment, because I personally believe that housing is a right. So now let's talk a little bit about Form-Based Codes Institute, which is a program of Smart Growth America. Our mission is to advance zoning reform through the use of form-based codes that empower communities to achieve their vision of healthy, livable places, healthy people, and shared prosperity. We do that through our form-based codes classes, which run from the basics, form-based code 101, the ABCs of form-based codes. Essentially gives you a good overview of what is a form-based code, and why should people matter and why should they care, through form-based codes 201 and 301, which are more meatier and weighty and go through the administration and implementation of a form-based code. We also have our form-based code award program, which is going into its 16th year. You may have heard of it previously known as the Driehaus Award for Form-Based Codes Excellence, but we recently rebranded as part of a larger rebranding effort for Form-Based Codes Institute. And the Form-Based Code Award highlights exemplary versions of form-based code. We apply a rigorous standards of practice to the award applicants. The winning award is then placed on our code library as an example of the best class that is open to anybody as a resource who might be interested in developing a form-based code. And then we also have form-based code RFP templates for communities who are interested in writing a form-based code. Finally, we have our Codes for Communities Technical Assistance Program that runs the gamut from code audits. Basically, do you have a form-based code? If you do, here are some findings. If not, here's how to get it more in line with what is a form-based code, all the way through actual technical assistance with community programs and advocates. The most recent community Codes for Communities Technical Assistance project that we are wrapping up phase 2 is the North End Equitable Development Strategy, where we work with a local advocacy group and gave them the tools to advocate for good, smart growth in their community. And really quickly, a little bit of history about the Form-Based Codes Institute. It was formed in 2004, and we developed those standards, we provide education, and we also create a forum for discussion and advancement of form-based codes. It was created in 2004 with a coalition of practitioners, of urban designers, code writers who came together and felt that they needed something, the world needed something as an alternative to traditional zoning. That became formalized at the FBCI, and in 2017, FBCI joined Smart Growth America. All right, so that was a lot of level setting about my company and the program FBCI. Now we're going to actually get into the meat of what we're here to talk about, and that's how form-based codes can be a creative tool for communities and cities to remedy the inequities often produced by the conventional system. We're going to do that by talking about what is a form-based code, so we all have the same vocabulary, speaking the same language. Then we'll talk about how form-based codes can actually lead to equity. And then we'll wrap up with some examples of equitable approaches to form-based codes, some case studies that are actually in use now. So what is a form-based code? I'm going to read us the formal definition, and then we'll unpack that a little bit. A form-based code is a set of land development regulations that produces predictable built results, a high-quality walkable public realm, and uses physical form rather than the separation of uses as the organizing principle. It is a legally binding regulation, not an optional guide. It focuses on what happens outside the buildings, hence the moniker form, includes standards for both public and private development, ensures that the approved vision or plan for the area is realized, and ensures that the physical character of that vision is maintained over time. So that's a lot. Let's unpack that a little bit, and why does it matter? So a form-based code goes beyond regulating the use of land. uses are still a part, but it focuses more on placemaking communities, establishing the desired physical form of buildings in the community so that we can focus on the walls that shape our communities, those walls that shape the streets, the blocks, and the public spacings that the buildings enclose to make places that people can love. The goal is to create, protect, and revitalize those places by replacing our current broken land use regulatory system, which spawns community conflict and fraud development, which we'll get into in a little bit later in later slides. But really, I just want to highlight the key takeaway is that the use is a part of form-based code, but it's more flexible because the regulations are more prescriptive and predictable. Some of the code concepts of form-based codes, they include most conventional code standards, but again, they prioritize those standards differently. The rules for building form are more important than land use regulation. There's an emphasis on mixed use and range of housing types. There's a greater attention to the streetscape, the creation and design of the public realm, and the standards for building form and mass are consciously based on existing building context and or desired change. In short, there is an extreme emphasis on placemaking in the community. So, form-based codes are an alternative to traditional zoning. So let's really quickly have a really quick review of traditional zoning. We're all very well aware of what zoning is in one way, shape, or capacity, but just a level set to compare and contrast form-based codes to traditional zoning. It was devised over 100 years ago to prevent undesirable adjacent uses, thinking your factories next to your homes, your schools across the street from taverns, and incompatible adjacent scales of development, also known as Euclidean zoning. But the application of traditional zoning over the last 100 years, implicitly and explicitly, has led to segregation of communities based on wealth, race, ethnic group, and abilities, and continues to pervade most American communities today. Form-based codes are land use regulations that foster predictable, walkable, and mixed-use development by focusing on the form of the buildings as its guiding principles, which is a way to kind of ameliorate some of those negative impacts of traditional zoning. As we all know, traditional zoning has led to car-dependent sprawling communities, which has had also the intent of separating communities and people from uses in each other. Some key defining features of traditional zoning, as I mentioned ad nauseum, it focuses on parsing land use and density as a development control, organizes the ordinance by exceptions to the rule. It is out of sync generally with community values as embodied by the community's comprehensive plan. It relies greatly on the permit process, again, neglecting the role of the form, and the prescriptive arbitrary standards as its guiding principles, such as floor area ratio, dwellings per acre, setbacks, parking ratios, and traffic level of service typically are again neglecting the role of the form and leading to prescriptive arbitrary development in our community. But zoning reform is a critical avenue to advancing equitable, sustainable development, and it supports communities historically marginalized by exclusionary land use policy. They are created to encourage mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented development, as well as encouraging other modalities of development, of mobility. The goal of form-based code, again, is not about regulating appearance, but rather about placemaking. And it does that by asking, as well as answering the questions, how does a place actually function for people? How do the pieces fit together? And some of those placemaking components, which we'll talk about a little bit later, are street trees, the block sizes of our communities, lots, intersection spacing, block dimensions, lot sizes, streetscapes, right-of-way width, component widths, landscape and street furniture, and so on. So some of the standards of practice for building form and mass are consciously based on existing context and or desired changes. That's a detailed physical plan and clear vision, a statement of intent and purposes, building form standards with specific requirements for building placement and building frontages that shape public spaces, a regulating plan that establishes a specific set of standards for each zone shown on the regulating plan, centers and office parks, clear objective standards with limited or no discretionary review, pedestrian scale thoroughfare standards that promote and conserve an interconnected street network and pedestrian scale blocks, again with the emphasis on multi-modality of mobility, predictable physical outcomes, common use language, graphics and diagrams, and diversity of uses and housing types. Now let's walk through each one of those individually. The first component, a regulating plan. The key takeaway here is that there is a focus on hierarchy, scale, context, and character in the plan. This is most comparable to your traditional zoning map. Again, the regulating plan maps the intensity, form, and character rather than simply land uses. There's an emphasis on blending physical form in the transitions instead of buffering uses. Again, we're asked that question, how do the pieces fit together? This may include block and subdivision standards, particularly for greenfield sites, suburban transformation, and toolkits. There's a common misconception that form-based codes don't regulate use. They do, but the emphasis is on the simplified categories of land uses. We all know that running joke, how many different ways can you define barbershop? Punchline is, look at your average zoning ordinance definition chapter, and you'll see a multitude of definitions. And form-based code tries to simplify that by focusing on the category versus trying to enumerate every single potential definition of that use. Speaking of uses, there's an allowance of a mix of uses because again, we're focusing on the form of the building and the outside of the building versus what goes on inside the building, which also lends itself to infill development and community flexibility. A building can be anything. There could be any use inside a building as long as it fits within the form as outlined in the form-based code. And then finally, the regulated plan also reduces the number of conditional or special uses. Next, we have building form standards. The key takeaway is graphical and easy to use, easy to understand language for anybody. The idea is that anybody should be able to pick up this building form standard and understand what they can and cannot build in the community based off this code. Some of the standards included in the building form standard are building placement, building form, height and footprint, parking location, required number of spaces. Again, regarding parking, you want to kind of direct those in the back of the building because you want to keep that pedestrian feel, that pedestrian walkway, and you want your buildings to face the front of the building instead of having people looking at parking lots or garages. Encroachments are allowed in special cases. Franchise types are also allowed in land use tables. Again, this is comparable to your development standards. It may include standards addressing other sections of a conventional zoning ordinance. They're prescriptive with a focus on intended outcomes and relate buildings to one another. Build two lines and zones which define the public realm are okay rather than setbacks. And then you want to also think about your transition between your different scales. And the goal here is predictability and access and equity. Again, anybody should be able, from your most sophisticated developer to your most inquisitive community resident, should be able to pick up this building form standard and understand what is and is not allowed. Public space standard. You're thinking here about the living room of your community. You want to plan for civic spaces and thoroughfares. Don't just plop down open space anyway and be done with it. So you want to think through, what does your right of way look like? What are your street trees looking like? What are your, but I caution, word caution, don't get very into detail in the weeds, pardon the pun, with a landscaping plan. But really the idea is trying to intentionally think about what your community should look like. Bike lanes and on-street parking are also where these will be considered in this public space standard. Frontage types. Here, you're trying to think through a way to encourage that quote unquote classic Main Street feel. These standards are often incorporated in the building form standards, again, because you're shaping the public realm. You're shaping what the face of your community looks like here. You want to go for your prescriptive standards for a classic retail street versus those prohibitions on what not to do. Some final optional components. This is where you can get really community, local specific, in that local context into your form-based code. You have architectural standards, green building standards, landscape standards, so on and so forth. But the idea is here is you have any, special development standards in your community, or maybe some local political will, this is that opportunity to include them in your form-based code explicitly so that they're not lost in the code. So now we just walked through really fast what is a form-based code. Now let's talk through how the application of form-based codes can lead to equity. And in short, you have to document the problem first before you can change it. So that's really what this section is about. So we're going to walk through some of the ways that traditional zoning has been used in a racist manner. And I want to pause and really highlight that we're not seeing that traditional zoning is racist in and of itself, but rather the application of traditional zoning has led to these inequitable outcomes. And until we change it, until we name it, we can't change it. So first off, we're going to talk about the discretionary review process and how that has been used to cover racist motives for delaying and denying approvals. Subjective design standards, which have locked potential developers who aren't savvy or might be a smaller developer out of the process. Single family zones, which have been used to create whites only enclaves. Black people and other minorities cannot get government backed mortgages, the only mortgages with reasonable terms, remember, and therefore they cannot buy homes in single family zones. This made it more expensive for everyone because transit is not viable, requiring the purchase and maintenance of cars to live in these areas. So essentially, we locked people out of these communities. We focused on single family houses being really the only type of housing type that is allowed under single family zoning by right. So it's been the predominant land use pattern. And when you only have one type of land use, one type of single family housing type that is more expensive, it kind of leads to the housing crisis that we see today. Race-based zoning, same zones and maps that were found to be unconstitutional for decades after 1917 have still been in use, and we're still dealing with the effects of that. Racist planning based on zoning. Think of the idea of how industrial zones were placed explicitly and intentionally near multifamily zones and or minority communities and vice versa. How new freeways were placed directly through and across multifamily zones and minority communities, thereby destroying those communities, and how it was intentional. That also stole the value from those living there. It divided their neighborhoods. It added those health hazards, thinking of the freeway emissions next to a neighborhood. And then another example is how prohibitive uses such as liquor stores were excluded and prohibited from being included in single family zones, but they were allowed in multifamily zones or near multifamily zone neighborhoods, implicitly saying that you can only have these undesirable uses next to these multifamily or minority zones. Minimum lot sizes. The minimum lot sizes that were required were so large that they were cost prohibitive for minorities and people of color and others to access that development type. Expensive submittal requirements that again locked out minorities and potential smaller developers from the process. And then the local racist application of zoning. The classic example of when a zone for a neighborhood or parcel of land was arbitrarily changed to multifamily or industrial, or fees were drastically increased when it was determined that a developer was planning to sell or rent to minorities on that development that was going to subsequently be built on that parcel. Or the other example is when zoning was changed from multifamily to industrial when Blacks or other minorities started to move into those communities, thereby decreasing the property values for those homes and making it quote unquote undesirable to live there. So those are all the ways, those are all the equity issues that we've seen with traditional zoning. And I want to highlight that it's not just us policy wonks who are calling for these changes. There's a general desire for walkable mixed-use places that allow for multi-mobility places. And I'm going to give a shameless plug right here for Zone N, the economic benefits and shared prosperity with form-based codes. We produced this report in 2019, but the key takeaways are that we were seeing that community members have a greater desire for areas that were form-based code zoned because it was desirable for them to live. They could live near their jobs, they can live near amenities, they can walk places. There were transportation alternatives for everyday destinations. We also saw that stakeholders across jurisdictions emphasized the improved quality of life, walkability, and access to services and amenities in those areas that were zoned for form-based code. And that's not just us saying it, Form-Based Code Institute. Chris Nelson has done a lot of research about the fact that the majority of Americans want something other than a detached single-family home on a large lot. We're seeing a huge resurgence for missing middle housing, which is inherently embraced by form-based codes. And some quick statistics, only 70% of 18 to 25-year-olds have driver's licenses, and we're seeing the average BMT for all Americans continually to decrease. What that is saying to us that people either can't or don't want to drive everywhere every day. And then finally, the most recent case use that we've seen during the pandemic is that the creative class, millennials, and others are opting for their places to live based on amenities versus their job selection. So again, the key takeaway is that people want different choices. They want to be able to walk, bike, scoot in their communities for their everyday needs. This intentional separation of land uses, incomes, races, and ethnicities, coupled with other government policies, has contributed to a range of societal problems, including unequal distribution of wealth, racial segregation, autodependency, and suburban sprawl, urban abandonment, and blight, and significant environmental pollution. And form-based codes are emerging as a creative tool for communities and cities to remedy the inequities often produced by the conventional system. It's a critical avenue to advance these lofty goals for communities that were historically marginalized. And the reason it is, I want to pause there, kind of drill down, is it starts with the community visioning process. Form-based codes are all about democratizing the zoning, and it starts with that very intense community visioning process to inform the physical character and design of a community. And rather than separating housing from jobs and services, it encourages that mix of uses. And then it goes all the way through the implementation and administration of the code, because we're giving that power back to the community. They are comfortable with letting go the discretionary review process because they've been involved with the process their entire way. They have this easy to read, easy to use form-based code, and they are more comfortable knowing that the development that will come will be what they want and meet their vision, because they were at the table the entire way, and it's transparent. And they can point to the code. It's eliminated some of the focus on the FAR, the dwellings per acre, the setback, the parking ratios, and things of that nature, and it's focused more on the spaces of the community. So we found that once a form-based code is adopted, there's less of a reliance on the discretionary review process, particularly by the community members, because they're already comfortable with what's coming down the pipe. So how are the equitable approaches? We're going to walk through some examples, but they revolve primarily around increasing affordability, a first essential step toward desegregation and shared prosperity. Other strategies like improving access to public services and a more equitable distribution of public infrastructure investment must also be developed as well for a truly equitable community. And if crafted thoughtfully, zoning reform can address all of the aforementioned ingrained inequities, especially when paired with other equity-driven initiatives for developing and preserving affordable housing, preventing displacement, and supporting small businesses. This in turn spurs economic growth while reducing the cost of housing by creating opportunities for more people. In short, when you give the power back to the community, you thoughtfully create what your form of your community looks like. You allow for all these other development pattern types inherently in the code. And as we've seen in traditional zoning, some development types are simply illegal to develop because single family zoning is the only or the preferred pattern. And you have to go through all the rest of the process to do anything that's not explicitly enumerated in the zoning code. So some of these case studies include diversity of housing types, as I just mentioned. When you have that diversity of housing type, it increases affordability, which is that first essential step. So now to the actual meat of it. I've given a lot of level setting, a lot of background, but let's talk about some of the actual use cases. A community benefit program, which allows taller buildings or more housing units in exchange for a certain community benefit, is one way to encourage developers to include important resources or features in their projects that might not have necessarily been included from the beginning. The most recent example that I can point to is New Rochelle, New York. Their floor-based code offers developers up to 4 additional floors if their projects include greater energy efficiency, attainable space for low-income artists, historic preservation, affordable housing, or certain community facilities. Alternatively, developers can pay into a benefit fund that supports workforce training, job placement services, and relocation assistance for residents and businesses. Affordable housing requirements. I've talked a lot about this. Some form-based codes require developers to provide a minimum amount of affordable units for low and moderate income residents. And affordable housing requirements, especially when combined with community benefit programs, can increase the benefits to a community. On the screen, you can see the Arlington Mill Residences on Columbia Pike, which is a 4-story, 122-unit complex that's 100% affordable for 60% AMI. And this provision was adopted along with the community benefit program at Columbia Pike. And I also want to note that the units must remain affordable for 30 years for households earning up to 60% of that AMI. Small business sensitivity. Zoning regulations and form-based codes for commercial development can be designed to support small or minority-owned businesses and help retain local workers. Winooski, Vermont added in their urban general frontage form-based code. They allowed for smaller than normal business frontages, which was directly allowed to small immigrant minority-owned residents to afford the buildings and the permits so that they can have businesses, that affordable space. And they've seen a good amount of increase in small immigrant business owners using this tool. And expanding housing choice by regulating form, not density, they enable an array of building types that fill the void of missing middle housing. Things like cottage apartments, bungalow courts, and triplexes that can create smaller size and more affordable dwelling units. When communities open up formally exclusive single-family areas to these types of housing, a wider array of people can live in there. There will more people and more walkable street grids that form building codes, form-based codes promote. These neighborhoods can better support and be served by public transportation. They can also help to address the oversupply and high costs of single-family homes. They empower homeowners to make decisions about the use of their privately owned residential properties. They increase housing supply and diversity, often an affordable multi-generational housing option. One quick statistic from AARP, Rodney Harrell, stated that 60% of adults would be open to living in ADUs. This allows for people to age in place. and for people to unlock the value of their properties. As you see on the screen here, we have two examples of properties that are zoned conventionally and form-based code. On the left, you see the large lot size and the property, the building that takes up the majority of the property. That's essentially one building that will be owned by one family for the average of 30, 40 years. That locks in the value of that property, right? But then on the right-hand side, you see how that same property can be split in two, and then maybe you can put a main building on one side and accessory building on the other, and one building can be rented out or the other one can sold. Again, letting the owner decide what they will do with the value of their property. And finally, we have adjusting parking requirements. The high minimum parking requirements typically require developers to construct expensive parking, the cost of which gets passed on to renters, whether they own a car or not, through higher rents. Reducing or eliminating these costly requirements around transit stops and walkable neighborhoods or on properties with affordable housing can improve affordability. A good example of this is the citywide Miami 2021 form-based code, which makes gentle density and missing middle housing more economically viable by eliminating parking requirements in urban neighborhoods. And if you remember earlier in the presentation, we talked about how you want to kind of put your parking in the back, or you can think through shared parking so that people can share the value, property owners can share the value and the benefits of the parking spaces. Another approach I would like to share is the North End Equitable Development Strategy. This is some technical assistance we just wrapped up in the North End of Newport, Rhode Island. The Pell Bridge realignment led to the most recent planning event in the neighborhood, the North End Urban Plan, and it identified the neighborhood as the last major redevelopment effort, as well as identifying the North End as an innovation hub, essentially directing all development, all of those technical skill jobs to that neighborhood, which is a lofty aspirational goal, trying to remediate some of the issues that came through with the Pell Bridge alignment through the neighborhood. But there was one issue: the community engagement was minimum at best, and many of the neighborhood residents felt that the city was planning for them and about them, but not connecting with them. That led to the creation of the Local Advisory Group, which rebranded as the Local Advocacy Group. The LAG then engaged with Smart Growth America and Form-Based Codes Institute to help them figure out what an equitable development strategy looks like in the North End. The residents settled on 6 community priorities: community empowerment, housing affordability and mitigating displacement, high quality, publicly accessible open space, workforce development / economic diversification, neighborhood development, road safety and connectivity. Additionally, the North End Urban Plan adopted some citizen proposed zoning amendments that codifies these community priorities, along with the community benefit agreement that the citizens proposed based off of the work with the Smart Growth America. This is something to note because A, we gave the citizens the tools to advocate for themselves, and B, it's almost unheard of, at least in my experience, where citizen proposed zoning amendments are actually reviewed and accepted by the city and adopted. So they codified the community's desires into the zoning ordinance. And then finally, the needs was accepted by the planning board and the city council, and it serves as an example of what equitable development can look like in the North End, as well as communities around the country. So I want to leave you all with some resources. Form-Based Codes, the guide for planners, urban designers, municipalities, and developers, was developed by Dan and Karen Parolic, who sits on my steering committee, as well as Paul Crawford. This is like pretty much the textbook for the nuts and bolts of writing and administering a form-based code. Then we also have the Form-Based Codes, a step-by-step for communities, which is a guidebook that was produced by SBCI and the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. that was, this is more of a higher level guide for municipalities and decision makers. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the zone end report, which makes the business case for form-based codes. And the main takeaways from that report is that it produces better economic outcomes for everyone involved, brings positive impacts for equity and equitable development, and provides a regulatory framework for good, smart growth development. We like to talk. We like to hear from everybody. We're on all the socials. And we also have a website, and then we have the website of our parent organization. So that concludes my formal presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen, and I am available. I'm here for questions and discussion, and I'll pause there.
Can we see the results from your poll?
Yes,
Let me give you the controls. Well, let me turn your controls back on. Hold on. And if you haven't, I did put the link in the chat function, everybody. So, oh, there you go. Look at that.
Wow. So it looks like y'all heard me. We got design, zoning, use, form, urbanism. Oh, gentrification, that's interesting. Architecture, streetscapes. So maybe we leave this up, Christine.
I was just gonna say that. Let's leave it up so people can just kind of take a look at it, and maybe it will inspire them if you have any other questions. Wonderful. Yeah, no, we have questions, so let's dive in. You had mentioned elderly and aging in place and accessory dwelling units. So, and I know you had mentioned ARP, and we actually had someone on last week's, I think it was last week's webcast from the Livable Communities group within AARP. Anyway, so I was just thinking about some of the things we talked about last week. And could you tell me what are some things that our 50+ community can benefit from in terms of form-based codes? You know, and I know you mentioned accessory dwelling units and the ability to age in place, but is there anything else outside of that that the elderly can, you know, really benefit from?
Oh yes, I probably could have did a whole presentation just on that. And really quick, ARP is really great, and we have we'll be producing a form-based code for non-planners with them in South California later on this month. And before I get into my response, I want to highlight that I love the fact that ARP is kind of expanding their use case. So they're thinking about how it can be livable for everybody. And one of the things that stands out to me is when you design a community that is appropriate for everybody, everybody wins, right? And what I mean by that, if you have a multimodal community and there's accessibility for people who might be blind or people who might have mobility issues, that helps everybody. Everybody benefits from curb cuts. Everybody benefits from longer walk lights for the stop, what do you call it? The little walking dude across the whatever. So I just want to highlight that. Then as to drill down on how form-based codes can help our elderly members, you know, if they're a homeowner and they want to age in place, but they don't want to leave their house, but they found that 1,000 square foot home is just too big for them. Maybe they can split their lot and put an ADU in the back, rent out the front, continuing to generate wealth for themselves. It's a little bit, most likely, ostensibly a lower cost, so it benefits a new homeowner or a new renter. It unlocks that property so that it can later that turnover for people to live there. And then the person who owns it, the elderly person, they have like kind of like naturally built-in surveillance. Surveillance is not a good word, but it's like if you're in the ADU in the back and you're renting to somebody, most likely you have a relationship. So they'll kind of keep an eye out for you. So it's all over the board that form-based codes can help, you know, the elderly age in place. But then as I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, once you start kind of developing your community for that lens, it helps everybody. Another good example, this is not necessarily form-based code, but it's kind of tied into the conversation, when you have those stripes on the road, they fade over time. And if you're a little bit elderly, you still have your driver's license, it might be harder to see those lines. You make sure those lines are refreshed. They help the elderly people see, but they also help everybody who's driving. If you have, you know, it's walkable, it's mixed use, your pharmacy is on the street, more of your buildings are facing the street, so there are more eyes on the street, and you're elderly, you're walking alone, maybe that builds community. Maybe that gets people, they see you walking every day. Hey, that's Jim, that's my elderly laborer. They live down the street. Let me speak to them. And now you kind of built that natural relationship.
Great, thank you. So what proportion of communities adopt form-based codes just for like individual neighborhoods versus a whole city?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, I don't have the actual statistics, but I can say that we do see that diversity of, you can apply it at any context. It can be one parcel. It can be an entire community. I'm trying to think, rattling my brain of, there's Cotati, California. They have a form-based code for their downtown core. Oh gosh, one just came across my desk for the form-based code award. Actually, it's for a Columbia Pipe. They have corridor form-based codes as well as an entire county-wide form-based code. Miami 2021 and Denver, those are both citywide form-based codes. So it runs the gamut. It really is, you didn't ask this part, but I add on to it. It depends on your community will. South Bend, Indiana, when they adopted their form-based code, they started in an incremental process 3 years before they formally adopted the full code. So they started with blocks here and there. Their community got used to it. Then they started expanding, and eventually they developed a full form-based code. So that was like a lot. So let me reframe that to kind of tie it together. So to answer your original question, it can be applied in any context, as small as a parcel all the way up to a county. We have a variety of communities that have them at a variety of different scales. And some of those highlights are Denver code, from Miami 2021, and South Bend, Indiana. Those are all 3 form-based code award winners.
Great. So in your opinion, what situations in a community may offer the best opportunities to introduce a form-based code?
That's a really great question. I would say, gosh, because it's so context dependent, right? Really just got to start with your community will. If there's a community, look at your demographics, who's living there, who's moving there, look at who your developers are. But if you can get the decision makers in the room and get them to know about form-based code, and if you can start getting your community members to think about it, start thinking about what are some of the elements that keep popping up at your meetings, your city council and your planning board meetings. What are the key things that your residents keep kind of complaining about, or like during public comment they keep hinting about? And if you start looking at that and do root cause analysis, you'll kind of start seeing some threads. Okay, there be more housing. Do you have a housing crisis? That might be a community that's right for a form-based code. Do you have dangerous roadways? Another shameless plug, we wrote Dangerous by Design, top 35 dangerous metros that are dangerous for multimodal transportation that's outside of cars. Start doing those kind of analysis. I can't really point to any one community right now and say, oh, they need to get it. Because if I say that, I say every community needs one.
Sure. What about like defunct shopping malls or strip centers or brownfields? Like, are those, because everybody's got them, right? Yes. So are those good places to start the conversation, to use as almost like a trial?
Yes, and you just made me think about it. So if you bear with me, I am going to, where did my webcam go? I don't know where my webcam go, but I'm going to switch to a screen. I think the root of what you're asking me is what are some of the other use cases for form-based codes? And you're right, it's 100% those things. You can revitalize a downtown. Let me trying to share my screen at the same time. So yeah, revitalize a downtown. This is Bradenton, Florida. Historic neighborhoods, transit-oriented design. Are you thinking about trying to do that? You know, a TOD, this is a perfect candidate for form-based code. Enable traditional neighborhood development, retrofit your urban sprawl. So those are some of those use cases that I was share. So yes, think about what is in your community, what needs to be fixed, and that can start the conversation.
Okay. We have someone writing in here that they're starting the process of writing a form-based code next week.
Oh, wow.
So that said, do you have any last-minute tips on studying the character of neighborhoods? And then two, any advice on how to get started? I know you've talked a lot about understanding what a form-based code is, taking, getting out to your community to, understand what the issues are, what, the aspirations are, getting the community buy-in. Obviously, we need to get the decision makers buy-in first and probably foremost, maybe. But what else do you have? What other tips or tricks do you have in this process of really getting started and kind of laying the framework?
Number one, you can never have too much community engagement. Start early and often. And I really like the approach that South Bend, Indiana did. And when I say their approach, they started very incrementally. They started with a brief PowerPoint presentation at a planning board. This 20, 30 minutes, this is what form-based codes are. Then the next planning meeting, they did a context analysis for their community. Hey, this is what our community looks like right now. And that was it. Then the next meeting they talked about where we identify some issues. Let's do a visioning strategy. What do we want? Do we want more car? Do we want more sprawl? Do we want to be able to walk to get a quart of milk? And a very incremental process. And then at each time they did a check-in. They're like, this is what we heard. This is what we put down on paper. Did we get it right? Then when the community said yes, they came back and said, okay, last time y'all told us this is what we wrote down. We're going to adopt it. And it was very incremental. And I know it sounds like I'm really beating this dead horse about community engagement, but that's really where you start. Start with your community. Start educating your decision makers early and often. Shameless plug, we do Form-Based Codes 101. We have a class coming up late October, early November. But start getting people used to what it is so they're using the same language. And then once you get that buy-in, then you can start moving towards the process of looking at other forms of form-based code, like the actual standards of practice, and then trying to map out like what you currently have, what you want against what those standards of practice are. So I think that would be a good start. And then finally, you can always call me and we can do a visioning session.
Right. Okay, so while you're taking a sip here, this next question, this is good. It's sort of like this foreseeable catch-22 situation and how do we get ourselves out of it. So you create this form-based code and years later it worked and you have this very desirable place to work and live. And then this in turn will drive up the values of homes. And all of a sudden, it perhaps can become not so affordable. So how do we ensure that this doesn't happen?
That is a fantastic question.
Right? I know, I was saving that one.
I could go like, oh my gosh. So number one is the code is a living code. So you should always be touching it. You should always be coming back and trying to make sure it's right size for your community. And if you're seeing something happen, then that means that there's an opportunity to address it in the code, and kind of, do a root cause analysis. What's going on? Why are you seeing? You wrote this form-based code that's supposed to encourage infill development and mixed and middle housing, but for some reason you're only getting this one type of development pattern. What's going on? Kind of like truth check it. Then once you did that, go back to the community again. It's a never-ending process, and then you kind of update your code. The other thing I'll say is, and it was one of the key takeaways we found in the zone in report, we don't really see that. We see that there's a lot of people who get interest in your community, but because you're encouraging a diversity of housing types, you don't really kind of get that same kind of housing crisis that we have. And a really quick departure, a digression, we're kind of seeing the housing crisis because we only have one format of housing. It's single family housing that is not inherently bad. I want to really hit on that, but it's one set pattern. You get one household, ostensibly, they'll live in a house for about 30 years, they'll gain wealth, and then either they'll turn it over to their children or they'll sell it to another family, starting that cycle again. Works great when you have a diversity of housing units. That's where missing middle comes from. You need the housing for your entry to the job market. I just graduated high school and I'm going straight to work. I don't need a big single family house with a quarter-acre yard. And maybe I can't afford it either unless I got a trust fund. There's neither here nor there. Or I'm a single mother and I don't need a big house, but maybe I want a townhouse. Or maybe, age in place. I'm an older woman or an older bachelor. I never had a family, but I still need some place to live. So when you have that diversity of housing types, you have those different price points, you hit different levels, and you don't have that bubble that kind of happens where you have, to keep the math simple, 100 single family houses, they're all priced at $100, and I only make 50, and I got 300 people that need a house. It's keeping the math simple.
So how do we strike a balance when we're forming a form-based code between not enough detail and too much detail? Because I feel like either way could create the opposite effect of what you're going for. So how do we strike the balance?
Wow, that is a fantastic question. I think it will come out in the wash, right? Once you adopted your code. And if you're starting to see a lot of requests for deviations from the code, maybe you didn't quite right size it. So it's kind of like, you kind of know it when you see it type deal. And if you follow the process, right, you should have something radically different from a traditional zoning code. A good example, I worked at a jurisdiction, this zoning code had literally 100 articles, just in a zoning code, right? Because it was trying to address every single potential that could happen. But you should have categories. Like I kind of gave the running joke, like if you have 50 different definitions for a salon, it's not right. But you should, if you have salon, and it could pretty much be anywhere in the community, as long as it fits that form of the building. That's what we really care about. What does our community look like versus the actual use inside the building?
Now, there is a question here specifically about certain types of uses that might produce environmental contamination. Are there any rules that we should go by? So in this context, they say, how can FBCs address uses that cannot be adjacently located, such as a historic or current dry cleaners and a multifamily residential building, due to groundwater contamination concerns? So that should be addressed in a form-based code.
I think that's where you get into that location specific type deals, the back end of what's optional. I think there it came back. Like I said, use is a part of form-based code. It's not completely eliminated. You can address some things of that, but again, the primary focus is on what does the form of the building look like. And there's different. I didn't include it in the PowerPoint presentation, but there's a graphic that shows the transects where it goes from the complete green field all the way to the urban infill development, right? So within that, you'll be able to find out where it goes. Some of the things will naturally place themselves through your community, especially if you have like a downtown urban core and your form-based code is kind of being placed on top of it to kind of right size it. It'll naturally kind of work itself out. And then you also have the opportunity with the optional elements to be added.
Okay. All right. So next question.
These are some great questions.
Oh, I know, right? No, we have a good group of folks today on the line. Can you describe how most zoning codes include discretionary standards, which can then unevenly be applied and historically used to exclude, versus form-based code that provides more objective standards and measurements? Can you just kind of talk, and I know you spoke about this earlier, but if you could just kind of again summarize the difference in that.
Yeah, I think that goes back to where you try to have the by right and the for right in your code. And when your code doesn't include something, it has to go before the discretionary review process. And then that discretionary review process can and has been many times co-opted for whatever purposes, think your NIMBYs. Versus the form-based code, which is more about, again, it's the form. Like you shouldn't really have as much discretionary review. There's still an opportunity for it, but it shouldn't be the de facto process, right? So a good example would be, let's take the dry cleaner example, right? So in a traditional zoning code, if I own a piece of property that's zoned industrial, it should be a slam dunk. Shouldn't have to go to discretionary review, right? But let's say I own a piece of property that has, is light commercial zone or something like that. And this in my code, the dry cleaner is defined as a heavy industrial use. I will have to go through the process to be able to get a permit so that I can use this use on my property. Versus the form-based code, the code is, does it look like what is prescribed in the regulating plan? Does it look like what is described in the building standard? Does it look like is described in there? And you're looking at the building. So I don't necessarily care about the use. So the use that goes inside the building. And if the building is already developed, that's just a simple checklist, right? And it's already a slam dunk.
So we have a question here from someone who is a little concerned about potential uses coming in. So the question is, I work for an economically thriving community. We would like to apply FBC to get many of the benefits that you've described, but there's reluctance to walk away entirely from a use-based zoning because there's concern that the market will produce more of what the community doesn't necessarily want, such as in this case, office, instead of what the community does want. In this case, housing and retail. So, instead of blocking off sections of uses like in a traditional code, it's a lot easier for uses to come in that, fit the structure, but that aren't necessarily part of what the community is looking for. So how can we ensure a diverse mix of commercial in using a form-based code?
Oh, that's a really great one. I would say, number one, call me because we need to have a deeper conversation. I need more context. But from a high level, I would say that is where your community vision process comes into play. And then maybe that looks like you have different transects. Miami 2021 code is pretty good about that. Denver Common as well, about where there's different parts of form-based code applied to different parts of the community. So it would be, and then those uses are included. They're not completely thrown out, where they'll enumerate some of those categories of uses. So then working in concert with your community, hearing what your community says. And if your community says, we're good on office, we don't want any more office, then that's where your form-based code will kind of be crafted in such a way so it has different areas so that you can say, in the downtown core, for example, that's the pure form-based code, anything goes. We're kind of directing everything there, that if you want to go office, you want to do something a little bit outside of the downtown core, or you want to do something different from office, maybe you change the rest of the code, the zone, to craft around the rest of the community.
Excellent. And someone just typed in, we implemented a hybrid form-based code use strategy into our downtown. So look up Covington, Washington, if you're interested in looking at a hybrid approach.
And I'll say, why don't you apply for a form-based code award?
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Next year.
Let's see. Oh, here. Oh, this is good. Okay. So there's just so many good ones. All right. Okay, here we go. How do we go about incorporating low impact development principles in form-based codes? Is there a place for it? How do we do it?
I think I will leave a little bit more why they say there's no place for it in the code. I think, again, the uses are included and there are development standards that are in form-based codes. It's just not the guiding principle for it. And inherently, it's an infill development friendly code, since we are focusing on the form of the building and developing those, like I think I said, called it the living room of the community, the civic spaces and things like that.
Okay. Some people might say, we don't need form-based codes because we already have an affordable housing policy or inclusionary housing. So how would you make the case that form-based codes could support affordable housing even more?
Wow, that's a really good one. I would probably say, if I was sitting in the place of that person, I would kind of drill down, why do they think that you don't need more affordable housing? And stepping back a little bit, it's more about, I'll probably reframe that as housing attainability. You can never have too much housing at different price points, at different diversity types, and that form-based code lends itself to that. So you always have people wanting to move to your community. You always have, every community has a need for more housing. I'm sorry, I think that's the hill I'll die on, right? And if form-based code lends itself to opening up that door for more, then you compare it with things like a community benefit program. Everybody wins. So I think I'll push back on it a little bit.
This is another good one. The regulations leading to improved outcomes attributed to form-based codes are ones that I have frequently written into traditional Euclidean zoning and design standards, including your missing middle housing that we've talked about, street walls, parking in the rear, etc., all that. So are there any outcomes that are not possible through traditional zoning that we can achieve through form-based codes? Or is the real benefit the format? That is, that the code is easier, more engaging for non-planners, easier to understand. What are your thoughts?
That's a good question. And so I'll say to that, inherently traditional zoning is not bad. So I just really want to level set on that. But then we've seen the negative uses of traditional zoning, and that is one of the reasons that I advocate for form-based code so much. Yes, you're right. You can achieve the same outgoes, the same outcomes with traditional zoning versus form-based code, right? But then you have all the other added benefits where, well, let me back up before I even say that. In some places, it's illegal to build anything but what is in the code, right? So a good example, in Los Angeles, you can't build anything but single family housing. Not knocking on Los Angeles, not knocking on traditional zoning, but this is an alternative that makes it less focused on what you can and can't do, is a way to say it. versus on what you want your community to look like. So I would probably say, number one, I applaud them. That's amazing that they were able to achieve those outcomes. But I am still feel a strong advocate for a form-based code, because you have all the negative, unintended and intended consequences that have gone with traditional zoning.
I'm curious about this. What did I do with it? Oh, hold on. Let me grab it. I'm curious if you have heard of it, and in no way am I advertising it. I actually know nothing about it, except that I just got it from my local bookstore, because he's making the rounds on all of the speaking circuits right now. Arbitrary lines, essentially, it's how zoning broke the American city and how to fix it. And it's basically like, y'all, we need to get rid of zoning. And of course, like I said, I have not read it yet, and I have not listened in on any of his talks yet. But I'm curious if you have, and even just outside of that, like, should we really be having these deep conversations about getting rid of zoning? Or, we have a webcast coming up in the next couple of weeks about essentially alternatives to Euclidean zoning, form-based codes being one of those options. Should we really be having this conversation? Like, should we really be seriously sitting down and saying this Euclidean zoning is going to go away? It is finite, and we are just at the point, we are sort of at that nexus where the communities are starting to realize that Euclidean zoning isn't working right now, and it hasn't worked, and what has come out of it hasn't worked, and we sort of need to erase it and start over. Do you think we need to go that drastic? And do you think there will come a time where Euclidean zoning will really be a thing of the past?
So I'll start with, I haven't read the book either. It's on my to read list. And he is making the rounds. I met him at the Up for Growth Housing Under Production event a couple of months ago. Gator speaker, and you're very right. He is a strong advocate for eliminating zoning altogether, right? Farm-Based Codes Institute and Smart Growth America writ large, we're more focused on smart growth and the application of the smart growth principles, right? Right now, we are saying that form-based code is a smart growth principle. It's one of those ways that we get to it, right? As far as completely eliminating zoning altogether, I think we should be having that conversation. I think we should be talking, but like I said it earlier in the deck, you kind of have to define the problem first before you start to get rid of it altogether. And we here at Farm-Based Codes Institute, we did, and we landed on the decision that form-based codes are the way. Now, we are starting to think about the future, and I believe I read it in the Biden's administration's Housing Supply Action Plan, where they're starting to think about what zoning looks like on a national level as well. And inherent in that conversation is what's next for zoning, right? So, and I'm being very careful and measured with my words, because right here, our mission is to advance zoning reform through form-based codes. But that isn't to say that maybe the next part of the discussion is to talk about what does that look like in a world without zoning. Now, before I get, say yay or nay for one side or the other, I will say that zoning is the status quo right now. And that's kind of part of the reason why we have in the status quo, without unpacking it, there's a lot more. It's part of our culture. Single family homes, that's the American dream. You get your single family house with your white picket fence in the front and your 2.5 kids, right? But we are starting to see people want different things. People are calling for different things.
Sorry, people are asking for the title and the author, so I'm just putting it up. That's all. No comments either way. So write it down if you want to read it, people.
I mean, it's on my to read list right now as well. Another great book to read as a companion to that one, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And I heard recently that he's working on a sequel to that.
I heard that too, yeah.
The big headline here is, I do think we need to start having that conversation. As far as what side of that conversation I lie on right now, you asked me today, form-based codes is what we're advocating for. But I do think there's a lot of value in having that conversation. We're starting to see our community members ask for more. I mentioned it earlier in the zoned in report. We found, like, empirically, that people are moving to communities that have form-based codes. People are looking for communities that have amenities that they want and that they can walk to, and they have the option of which mobility mode they want to choose, right? So what I think that leads me to is the culture is going to tell us what's next. We can try to advocate for it. We can try to guide it, but we're going to start seeing more and more and more of people demanding multi-modes of mobility. And regardless, whatever, land development regulation we use to put on top of that, people are going to tell us what's next.
Let's see here. Thank you. All right, so plenty of neighborhoods with a diversity of housing types and regulations that focus on form still have deep problems with affordability. So to those naysayers, how would you say that a neighborhood with a form-based code still wouldn't suffer from the same issues?
Oh, I would say that,
or I guess, how do we ensure that we reduce the potential as much as possible?
I mean, I keep going back to the zoned in. We found the fiscal case for it. Now, we're currently working on what's part 2 because that was written in 2019. Who knows, we might get different results. I doubt it, because we're seeing that people want that, right? It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve every single problem everywhere. Nothing's a panacea. Not claiming that it's a silver bullet, but I think it helps a lot with this. Even we found it in our research, developers love form-based codes. It's easy. It reduces their time frame, which is
that was going to be a question that I had on here. How do developers feel about a form-based code versus a Euclidean code?
Now, change is hard. Everyone hates change initially, sure. But once you start seeing development come out of the ground, there's like that aha moment. It's like, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced bread. You mean on one page, I can look and see what I need to develop, and I don't have to calculate these FARs and these setbacks, and I can, essentially maximize my property, and I don't have the carrying costs of parking because we can share parking. We can have one, parking lot that's in the core, and everyone parks and shares in it. So to kind of bring it back to the question, I would say that it's not a silver bullet. I would say that we're starting to see the benefits of it. They're coming out of the ground. Codes are maturing. Developers love it. And it's simple and easy. I'm being reductive right now, but it's simple and easy to read. And, pictures tell 1,000 words. So it's going to lend itself to benefits.
Okay, I think we'll give you one more. There's still a lot of questions, but I feel I've been drilling you for like 40 minutes now. So
address out in the chat. I'll put my calendar out. I love to talk about this. So,
so let's close up with this. And I've asked this in a few different ways. We know that form-based codes have benefit. We as a planner, perhaps we're thinking about our community and we think, boy, my downtown or such and such neighborhood could really benefit from a form-based code, and all of the pistons are firing. And then you just think about, all right, well, what's next? So how do I start the conversation? Where do I start? How do I kick off a conversation with the decision makers, the officials, about changing the process for a particular neighborhood or a downtown, or perhaps your entire community? How do we start it? Where do we start it? What is the next step after I think this would be great for my community?
Education is key. Getting people to know that there is an alternative. It's not going to be overnight. You can't just go from, we have a traditional zoning code, it's been in place for 30, 40 years or whatever, and oops doops, now we have a form-based code. It's not for the faint of heart. I'm just going to be upfront because it is an intense, long, community-driven process, right? That said, when you get your key stakeholders on board, change happens. The North End Equitable Development Strategy, they didn't quite do a form-based code, but we did work with them. And the proof is in the pudding, the fact that they were able to get zoning amendments adopted that had form-based codes elements in 18 months. I don't know about you all, but most of the time a community member comes up with great ideas and you kind of just, say, hey, thanks, we appreciate it. And it doesn't really go much places. So the fact that the city council, they went from an adversarial relationship with their residents to a positive, fruitful, embracing one, I think is proof that this works. And it starts with education. It starts with talking about them. It starts with partnering with groups like AARP. It starts with giving that information, that knowledge sharing, knowing what the demographics of your community look like. It starts with talking about the housing crisis in your community. So it starts with education. And as far as next steps, another shameless plug, the Form-Based Code Institute, we do education, we do classes, we do these events, the Form-Based Codes 101. Actually, I just got a testimonial from Flint, Michigan. The mayor attended Form-Based Code 101. He saw the value, he became a change maker, and now Flint, Michigan has an adopted form-based code. We also have the form-based code awards. Again, a rigorous process that we evaluate form-based codes against. We then post the winner on our website. We have a library of award-winning codes. And then we have those RFP templates that you can look at. So you can look at the actual code. So if you go on there, you can see South Bend, Indiana, and you'll see their actual form-based code. So you can look at it and review it and see what it looks like. And then we have that template. So if you want to write an RFP for a form-based code, that you can use that and customize for your needs. So to wrap it up, it just starts with having a conversation.
And just to add 2 quick points to the piece of education, and this kind of goes a little bit off of form-based code specifically, but when we're talking about the equity piece and of housing, you mentioned Richard Rothstein and the color of law, and just Google him. He has 100 bazillion TED Talks, so he's really interesting to hear. And then the other one is, we had this webcast maybe a year or so ago, but the gentleman who did the documentary Shame of Chicago, the color tax. Woo! You just got to Google it. I don't know if it's available now. He was for a long time doing like private screenings for different groups, but I think he has like his sequel is coming out to it. So just Google the Shame of Chicago, and it's all about essentially the history of redlining in Chicago, and it is something else. And I highly encourage everyone to try to catch a viewing of that, because it was really good. So with that, thank you for joining us today. This was a great conversation, and I appreciate it. Sometimes zoning can be a little on the dry side, but this is, this is good stuff. So I thank you for joining us.
One more thing I just thought about, sure. The earlier question. Yeah. I know when we bring out the Z word, it brings out the pitchforks. Yeah. And change is hard, change is scary. But maybe you ease your community into it. Maybe like South Bend, I think they said it was like a 3 to 5 year process before they actually started saying the word of zoning reform. Like they but they carried their community along very slowly. Mm-hmm. And start with the basics, start about what's not working with your community, and then kind of hit that, and then you start talking about what could work. Shameless plug, form-based codes. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm not knocking traditional zoning. It's just we've seen for the last 100 years or so, as Mr. Rothstein painstakingly described, how inequitable. It's time for change. So,
Right. Okay. Well, thank you again, and thank you to the Planning in the Black Community Division of APA for hosting today's session. We will have this recorded and it'll be up probably sometime on Monday. So head over to ohioplanning.org/planning webcast to download, to get the link to download it, to get the title and event number if you need to submit CM credit. And you can also register for all of our upcoming sessions and all of that good stuff. So again, head over to ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great weekend and we'll talk next time. Bye-bye.
bye.